Defensive line day after Ohio State football practice today at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. I'm Nathan Baird from cleveland.com along with Stephen Means. We got Larry Johnson. We got, I think, 8 other defensive linemen. Larry says he loves the depth here. He thinks he has more than 4 starters, thinks he could play as many as 11 or 12 guys, and they rotate a lot here, but that's getting pretty deep. Stephen, you talked to several of these guys. What jumped out at you today as like maybe something new or something important that you heard?
Yeah, obviously it starts with Jack and JT, right? Everybody wants to know what's going on with the 5 stars in year 2 who might be Chase Bosa level. And the thing I took from it is Jack's been taking off weight. I mean, putting on weight since he got here, and I feel like he's just taking it from JT. JT said he showed up here at 276 last year. He's down to 267. He's wearing it better. He looks skinnier, and he said it's going to make him quicker in both as a pass rusher and in the run game. So that's interesting for a guy who he showed up here 2 weeks before today, a year ago, and so he's been through the entire program now. I asked Larry Johnson about when do you see guys take that jump. It's usually between year 1 and year 2. So what does that mean for JT? While with Jack, he said he's put on 35 pounds since the moment he showed up on this campus, and he also looks the part. His arms are as big as my head, which is so that's going to be the thing that we're going to be watching throughout the year. Is Ohio State's known to have superstar edge rushers. They've got 2 5-stars coming in the year 2. Who physically look the part and kind of know what they're doing now. What does that mean for on-field production?
I don't often get to say people's arms are as big as my head because I have like a gigantic head, especially compared to the rest of my body. That's how it is. Since you talked about ends, I'm going to talk about tackles. And the 2 guys who maybe have as much buzz as anybody in the program right now, Tyleik Williams, what he did last year, coming in, getting 5 sacks. Again, as we've mentioned before, a lot of that was in mop-up duty, fourth quarter blowouts. And Larry Johnson today referred to him as it wasn't just him, but like guys who come in as freshmen, as babies, as he called them, they often have like one skill. And his skill was to get after the passer, and it's a useful skill. But Ohio State needs him to grow and be more of a run stopper this year in order to be a guy that can play against frontline offenses, to be out there early in a game against Notre Dame and making a difference on the season opener. They need to see that kind of growth in camp. And one guy who he said has had a great camp is Mike Hall. I asked him specifically about Kevin Wilson talking yesterday about how that ain't no 3, and that's like the greatest 3 I've ever seen. And Larry Johnson's like, well, he's not with the 3s. Now he's with the 1s and 2s. And we're like, okay, yeah, well, we kind of knew that already. We saw that a little bit last Thursday. But he's had a great camp, he says. They've seen the progression that they want to see from him, and now it is just a matter of how he gets used. And it sounds like he has the versatility. Larry Johnson said, don't think of him as like a pure nose. Don't think of him as like maybe a little bit more like what Davon Hamilton, or certainly not what Tommy Togiai was. Zach Harrison said, asked him about him. He said that's not the same kind of athlete. Those guys are like Hulk and just these huge guys, and it's not that Mike Hall isn't strong, but he's a little bit more of a quick twitch athlete than maybe those guys were, and that's something he can get after the quarterback too, using those skills. So you're seeing this depth build. I think the defensive line was maybe a little bit we talk about it only in terms of like sacks and pass rush and things like that. And I think that they were overall a little bit disappointed in where that whole group was. Some of it, though, makes sense because it was a really young group with some of the guys that we've been talking about. We've been talking about all sophomores and redshirt freshmen so far in this video. But I think they think that just the sheer avalanche of guys are going to be able to throw out on the field. The optimism is rising right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you kind of get the vibe that, not to wave a flag here, but they're kind of sick of it at this point. And, they didn't have a good year last year, and they really didn't have a good year in 2020 either. And so Larry Johnson mentioned the fact that he feels like he has an alpha dog in the room. He didn't say who it was, but he says he has an alpha dog in the room. I think that as whether you're media or fans, you can kind of pinpoint some names of who that might be, whether it's upperclassmen or younger classmen. But he wasn't saying it the last 2 years that he felt like he had an alpha dog in the room. They had captains. They have one this year in Tyler Friday, but they didn't have alpha dogs in the room. And that's something you want to hear from a defensive line, especially with how the last 2 years have gone with them getting pushed around in the running game.
More defensive line talk coming up on Buckeye Talk. Get that wherever you can find podcasts, and get the text 614-350-3315. All of what we heard today from these coaches, from these players, went out over there from Buckeye Talk.